we still aren't quite there when it comes to truly accepting the humanity of people suffering from disabilities. Sure, things are better today than ever before, but we keep forgetting that we owe those in the past our respects too. Unfortunately, the access to the empty buildings of the infamous facilities has become a pop culture phenomenon. Let's talk about how the popular show Stranger Things might have added to that and what really is the problem. First things first, the Stranger Things Pennhurst shoutout. If you've been on the ghost hunting side of YouTube, you must have seen the investigations at the Pennhurst asylum. And so, when Nancy and Robin set out to speak to Victor Creel in the Pennhurst Mental Hospital, it felt like a shout out to all those who have spent their late nights digging deep into the history of the facility, or just watching the internet's favorite ghoul boys explore the place. But see, this is where people online have pointed out a serious issue. What felt like just a little mention meant for the history or supernatural nerds to be smug about and have their moment, and let's be honest, a lot of us went, I know what that is, was actually decades worth of painful human stories laced with torture and abuse. The creators of the show did change the name of the institution, probably to give it a touch of fiction, but still, it's quite obvious what they were going for here. And the show was successful in bringing the scary vibe, using this place and its patients and surrounding the whole thing in a somewhat sinister aura. All of this works perfectly for the show. And that, folks, is exactly what the problem is. That a place such as Pennhurst is just something that works perfectly for a show, or a YouTube video, or just a fun little spooky adventure with a few friends and some cans of beer. So as much as we all love Stranger Things, it's impossible to ignore that the creators might have added to the narrative that many people on the internet are now speaking up against. So let's imagine a look inside the Pennhurst asylum. It's time for a story, folks. It's 1976. You're a curious kid. You peek through a tiny hole in the wall of one of the biggest buildings high in the woods of Pennsylvania. You see a woman with messed up hair. Her clothes are covered in bloodstains. You can see that both her eyes are injured so badly that she's completely blind. She's alone in a tiny room so dark you can hardly make out anything other than her silhouette. And she's tied up to her bed so tight she can't move an inch. You can feel that she knows you're watching her and she tries to shift a little, and that scares the living daylight out of you. Of course, you run away as fast as you can. You're a bit of a coward in this story, if that's okay. When you try and investigate what the hell that was that you saw, by some, you're told it's an institution for lunatics, who are better off being locked up away from the rest of us, and that lady you saw should be kept there, or else she'll be a menace to society. Others tell you it's a place for scientific research, so that cures for mental disabilities can be conjured up. Some say it's a cursed, haunted place you should stay away from. This was the Pennhurst State School and Hospital, previously called the Eastern Pennsylvania Institution for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic. Beautiful, with green gardens and fresh air on the outside, and inhumane conditions, paired with abuse of patients on the inside. That woman sure must have been terrifying to look at, but she'd been tied up like that for over 600 hours when you saw her, and she'd remain restrained for over 700 hours the next month, and another 600 hours in the month after that. Why? Because she was too self-destructive. Yes, the picture we painted was a bit imaginary, but this was a real female patient, locked away because she used to hurt herself. But guess what? When after months of torment her therapy program was finally started, she actually showed progress and got a lot better. Too bad that science required the patient's brain to first be tortured to a pulp before it could be properly treated. Pennhurst is full of such stories. The patients were treated horribly by the staff and often abused physically, mentally, and even sexually. There were no systems of keeping the aggressive patients safe from each other, and so they'd injure and sometimes kill each other. The neglect was especially astonishing. The patients weren't regularly cleaned, nor were their wards, and there'd be urine and feces lying on the floor. If anything, the patients only got much worse during their time at this horrible place. But why on earth was this a thing? This question, we're afraid, has a very disturbing answer. So when the Pennhurst Institution was first established, there was this deeply rooted notion in society that those with mental disabilities were unfit to live freely among normal people and needed to be separated from society. When you think about how it wasn't even all that long ago, it makes it even more haunting. Also, let's not forget how it was the self-proclaimed progressive age for science and stuff. So instead of using that science for making their lives better, the institution was more focused on eradicating the mentally challenged from the human race altogether through eugenics. This whole idea of mentally disabled people people being a genetic mistake that needed to be rectified at best or kept hidden away at worst, had been cooking up for centuries before this. And in those times, such people would be sold, ostracized, and even killed. So when in the 1900s such asylums were introduced in the name of science and care, it was considered modern and progressive. The sad truth, though, was that it was still those same barbarous ideas. They just came better dressed this time. You're probably wondering why the families would leave their loved ones in such a place. The answer to that could be the fact that Pennhurst actually had a good reputation in its day, because the stories of abuse, they never really got out. But again, most poor souls here didn't really have any families. Some had stopped visiting them, and those who didn't want their loved ones to be there were trapped because there were no other systems or treatments in place to accommodate the mentally and intellectually challenged members of society. Damn, that's all incredibly bleak. But thanks to a successful class action, this hell's doors were slammed shut in 1987, once and for all. Now, what's up with dark tourism? This trend only keeps growing. Dark tourism is when people go to places where hundreds of people died horrible deaths, or just spent a hard time. So yeah, mostly abandoned asylums. See, there's nothing wrong with going to these places if it's done right. Hear us out on this. It's actually kind of important to have these buildings stand as evidence of our past mistakes, so that as a society, we don't repeat them. So even if someone wants to explore such a site, they must always regard those who suffered there and those who cared for them the way you'd visit a shrine, not a haunted theme park. If you still think there's nothing wrong with it, think of it in a more Titanic way. There have been many talks about taking the remains out and placing them in a museum, but the families of the deceased want them to stay there, at the bottom of the ocean, because that's their grave. The point here is that even when something checks all the boxes for being a mere public spectacle, sometimes the stories tied to those things make them so much more than that. A memory, a grave, a way to say, these walls tell the stories you never could. And for that, they deserve to be respected. Alright, back to Stranger Things. Okay, so let's go back to where we started. Pop culture references take the weight of real-life stories away, reducing places with gut-wrenching histories to trendy tourist spots. So what can the creators do to redeem this? The best suggestion out there is that they should add a credit at the end of that episode and pay regard to the real-life victims of Pennhurst. This way, we get to see a thrilling scene, while knowing that the creators acknowledge the seriousness of the situation, perfectly balanced, as all things should be. Next, in other news, Jamie, you're a king. Even after going through 8 hours of makeup and being in layers of thick prosthetics, Jamie Campbell-Bower doesn't have a word of complaint. In fact, in a recent interview with the BBC, he said he pinches himself at his luck. You've got some serious patience, man. We're lucky to have you as Vecna. And Steve, he's a musician. Joe Keery's talents are many, apart from babysitting, acting, and gorgeous hair. The man's also a musician. He just announced a new album. His album will be out in September, but the single, Change, is already released. Way to make your fans go crazy, Joe. That's a wrap for this video. What are your thoughts about using such institutions for entertainment purposes? And what was your reaction to seeing Pennhurst in Stranger Things? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. We'll see you in the next one.